focused on, it's the moment that any sort of consumer data, it doesn't even have to be personal data, it could be any data about that internet consumer's behavior or activities on the internet going from website to website on a given day. Web viewing behaviors is really what we're focused on. And this concerns non-affiliate websites. So it's a website or a network or a service that is not affiliated with the website that you're presently visiting. So for example, if a consumer is visiting CNN.com for the latest news headlines, but in fact maybe delivered an advertisement that's leveraging information about the websites that they previously visited before arriving to CNN. The point of it, the point of this data capture and this analysis of web viewing behaviors is to predict user preferences or interests, to basically draw some conclusions, some inferences, more accurately, on what the consumer's likely desires are going to be with regard to products or services or information or offers that might actually interest them. And from an advertising perspective, this is a very logical progression of internet-based advertising from the early days when we had very basic banner units that in some cases were not actually all that targeted, to where we are today, where we can actually leverage information about users' activities and make some important conclusions about what they might like to actually receive in an ad, on the presumption that they'd rather not get sort of clutter or irrelevant messaging, but they would accept information or messaging, advertising messaging, that actually does pertain to something that they're genuinely interested in. It's important to note, at least for the purposes of our discussion today, that there are some activities that are not included in the DAA framework. And this would be the activities of first parties. So in the previous example I just gave, where the internet consumer is visiting CNN.com, anything that CNN itself is doing in terms of that internet consumer's travel across their website or within their web pages, that's considered proprietary. It's within their domain, and it falls outside of the auspices of the DAA program. We're really, our practical guidance is focused on information that they've gathered from other sources prior to coming to that first-party website. Also, we recognize, as do the regulators, I feel to a certain extent, that there are information or there are metrics that are gathered for quote-unquote reasonable business purposes. So any online advertising operation does have a legitimate reason to gather usage behavior, well, usage information, what the internet consumer is doing, how they clicked on the ad, did they in fact go through and visit the website that the ad was taking them through, for the purposes of demonstrating that the ad actually worked on a functional level, but also because this is a measured media advertising, and there's an obligation for media properties to report back to the advertising agencies, the ad networks, and by extension the paying customer, the brand advertiser or the marketer, that their ad in fact was delivered and that the consumer interacted. And you need to gather metrics to prove that. After all, it's paid inventory. There's pricing and revenue associated with this, and we need to measure that and validate that as part of that processing. And contextual advertising is very similar to this notion of first-party advertising, which is that you may get an ad delivered to you based on the context of where you're visiting. So if you visit ESPN.com as a sports website, you could reasonably expect to receive a sports-themed ad. That would be contextual advertising. And that is also considered outside the auspices of this program, because this program, the DAA program, the ICON, is designed around third-party advertising, information that we're gathering for where you've been elsewhere. So if, to use that same example, you were to visit ESPN.com and you received an ad for a fragrance, a men's fragrance, may not necessarily fall within the scope of a sports-themed website, and it may in fact be behaviorally targeted. It may be an ad that was delivered because it saw that you visited, say, JCPenney, a retail website, and we're looking at pages pertaining to men's fragrances. And therefore, it assumed correctly that you might be interested in seeing that here. So that's OBA, essentially, targeting behaviors or gathering information on the behaviors of internet consumers in order to deliver an online ad. Now, not surprisingly, U.S. regulators have been looking at this arena very closely for a number of years. And back in 2009, they started to look closely at it, and since then, as I said, we're jumping back in time here. Early in 2010, they started to hold a series of privacy roundtables across the country, here in Washington and Berkeley, California. They invited industry, they invited advocates, they invited academics for a very open discussion on not just what OBA was all about, but also online privacy as an issue in a number of areas, children's advertising online, certain types of commerce that were occurring, with a view towards making potential recommendations for legislation or even requesting a broader enforcement authority. In a similar fashion, the U.S. Department of Commerce also started to make inquiries into this arena and published a report of their own, which they entitled Commercial Data Privacy and Innovation on the Internet Economy, where they made a series of recommendations on how businesses could both conduct responsible activities online while not infringing upon their abilities to grow and flourish in an Internet economy that is critical to the country's long-term sustainability. Legislators in Congress also introduced legislative proposals, chief among these John Kerry and John McCain's Commercial Privacy Bill of Rights, which was first introduced early last year, and John Rockefeller from West Virginia also introduced a Do Not Track Online Act of 2011. All of these, certainly the Kerry-McCain bill, very overarching in in terms of the remedies it was proposing to a broad spectrum of privacy issues, not just advertising or marketing or commerce related, but others as well. And Rockefeller's taking a very specific focus on this notion of how can we enable consumers to opt out of any kind of activity where information about their web-based behaviors may be used to deliver a message. So regulator scrutiny with the FTC and Commerce, legislative activity, and chief among these bills that you see here that were introduced last year, and then a technology layer also, because in parallel with all of this, there was a recognition in the IT community to be proactive, and certainly whether this was in concert with legislation or in some ways to preempt it, many of the browser manufacturers, certainly the top browser manufacturers, Microsoft with Internet Explorer, Apple with Safari, Mozilla with Firefox, Google with Chrome, all started to introduce technical implementations of this concept of do not track. So in other words, building in a browser-based control that consumers could exercise, whether that's a button or a menu or some sort of interface that would essentially allow them to express their preference not to be tracked. And for that information at the browser, in turn, to be picked up by any website or ad network or any other kind of online marketing delivery platform to recognize that browser-based header as a trigger, as an indication of that consumer's preference, and to respect that preference. Now, the FTC wasn't just talking idly about this or just publishing at a high level. They were also looking at very squarely at certain examples where they felt that online marketing or online commerce was being conducted in an untoward manner, certainly as an unfair or deceptive trade practice. And there's many examples of this. But one I draw to your attention is Chitika, which was an enforcement action undertaken in March of last year, just about this time. And in this example, Chitika, which is an online marketing company, had essentially offered consumers an opt-out mechanism from their marketing service. However, that opt-out expired prematurely, unbeknownst to the consumer. So where the consumer would effectively indicate their preference not to receive marketing from that company, that opt-out was not preserved over an appreciable period of time. So this was a very strong signal from the FTC that it wasn't just the notion of making a control available and legible and understandable to a consumer, but also to make sure that that preference was respected over time and not expired prematurely. So they alleged that Chitika had avoided that requirement and imposed successfully essentially a 20-year consent decree with the company. So every year for the next 20 years, Chitika has to report to the FTC that all of the components that they were alleged to have violated have been corrected, which they have, but to continue to demonstrate through an audit process that the opt-out is functional, that the opt-out through the hyperlink is made clearly visible to the end user, and that all appropriate disclosures and notices are provided in a timely way. You can certainly look up more information on that case alone as an interesting example of how the FTC looks at this issue. Certainly not the only example, but a relevant one today. Here's a quote from John Leibowitz, the FTC chairman, and this is again back in 2010, early in this process, where he notes that I would say that the business community really has it in its hands to avoid regulation. It just has to step up to the plate. So that was sort of a shot across the bow, if you will, to industry to sort of step up and demonstrate that they were serious about this issue, online behavioral advertising, and in a broader sense could actually demonstrate in a concerted manner by getting together that they could impose some practical guidelines on themselves before it became necessary for regulation to really come into play. And the response to that call was the formation of the DAA itself, the Digital Advertising Alliance, which got together in basically late July 2009, and is presently comprised of these organizations that you see here. The organization that I'm now part of, the 4As, the American Association of Advertising Agencies, representing the agency business, the AAF, of which you are all proud members, the brands marketers of the world through the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers, the direct marketers through the DMA, interactive advertisers through the Interactive Advertising Bureau, and the Network Advertising Initiative, another organization that I was part of many years ago when it first formed, representing the ad network community. And also an organization that's part of the effort, and we'll be talking about a little later on, is the Council of Better Business Bureaus, the CBBB, which along with the DMA acts as the accountability arm of the DAA self-regulatory program. And if after our discussion today you'd like even further information about what the DAA is, who beyond these organizations are involved, what sort of companies have participated in the program, you can do that by visiting our industry-facing website at aboutads.info, which I encourage you to do. But what this was essentially as a consortium of all of the key advertising and marketing trade groups is it demonstrated a very broad consensus-based approach to this notion of privacy protection in online behavioral advertising. And while individual efforts had been undertaken in the past, most notably by the NAI and by the IAB, here was an example for the first time, really unprecedented, that they had gotten together with some of the more traditional advertising organizations to together execute a program that would truly bring everyone in the advertising ecosystem together on this issue. And together they published this document, which is the one by which I defined the term OBA earlier. This is a document called the Self-Regulatory Principles for Online Behavioral Advertising, what we euphemistically refer to as the quote-unquote DAA Principles. And there are several principles that the groups articulated in this document. This document, by the way, is reviewable or downloadable at aboutads.info if you'd like to read it. It's actually quite accessible. It's not too legalistic. But just at a high level, I want to take you through what these principles are, what industry and what companies are expected to do relative to this industry effort. Education, certainly outreach to consumers, to industry, to help them understand what the issue is. For those who are doing OBA or thinking of doing it, to fully understand what their obligations are. For consumers to understand what industry is trying to do. Transparency, making sure that the companies that are doing OBA are transparent about it, about their practices, that they've offered consumers control, and that control mechanism is the advertising option icon, as we call it, and I will talk in a moment about how it works and how consumers exercise that control. The requirement for reasonable security safeguards, data security and integrity, hugely important, that whatever consumer data is gathered through the process of delivering these targeted ads, that data is preserved, that no one unauthorized has access to that data, that any sort of material change to a provision within a privacy policy more generally, but specifically any policy describing the company's OBA practices, that if that should change, that's communicated to the consumers that it will affect. That's an issue that's very important to the FTC. There's been numerous decisions, Gateway Learning for one, where they have taken action against companies that made arbitrary or unannounced changes to their policy without making that visible. Special provisions, special provisions around sensitive data, so data that is particularly sensitive, like health information or financial information. Should that come into the possession of the companies using it for targeted advertising, that it's not used to make any sort of adverse determinations. And finally, accountability, just that the organization is accountable for their practices with regard to consumer data use in targeted advertising. So obviously a lot more language and detail to each of these in the document itself, but at a high level, these are the linchpins of the program in terms of practical guidance to industry. The other component of the program, as I said, is the website, aboutads.info, which will give you a lot of background and actually some very useful information and tools if you engage in OBA now or you're considering it as part of your media mix. There's a lot of very helpful guidance, previous webinars that have been given on the topic by any one of the stakeholder organizations in the DAA. There are implementation guides that describe if you are a service provider, an ad network, a website, wherever you fall in the internet landscape, what your various obligations might be relative to this program. You can also register to participate in the DAA program if you're ready to take that step. And you'll get a copy of the agreement that you signed. You'll get all the relative information on how to build the icon into your advertising or how to embed it on your website, or both if you're doing that. So with the publication of the DAA Principles and the launch of the website and the release of the DAA icon to the web, the temperature changed a bit in terms of the regulator community, and this was an encouraging early remark for Chairman Leibowitz. This is following his previous remark where he notes, quote, "These guidelines," meaning the DAA guidelines, "are a direct response to the call by the FTC. I commend the coalition's efforts to bring together many diverse industry players to address privacy," unquote. So key points here, the fact that the guidelines were published, and in many ways these mimicked similar guidelines or directives that the FTC itself had published on this topic through that white paper that I mentioned earlier. And also diverse industry players. That's another key word here too. I think there was a recognition that this was an appropriate effort in terms of bringing all of the key players together to address this issue, not just one or two or a specific category of player. So what does it mean if you want to participate in the DAA program and you want to start using the DAA icon, as we call it, that little triangular turquoise eye icon, which you actually build into any OBA advertisement that you're going to run, or which you would build on your web page if you're capturing consumer data, again, based on multi-site data, not just the data within that website, for the purpose of delivering an ad. Well, the DAA will give you what we call a certification agreement. So this is not to walk through all the legalese with you right now, but just to share with you that this is not sort of a passive pledge that you make to a documented series of guidelines. You make an actual legal commitment to the DAA as an organization, as a nonprofit, which we are, a sanctioning body, that you will essentially obey or follow the DAA guidelines as articulated in that principles document. There is a modest certification fee, which is $5,500 per year for use of the icon. If you're an ad network, if you're someone that actually serves advertising on behalf of a client advertiser, you will want to participate in the actual opt-out page that we host at Ads.info. That's where all of the little DAA icons on the web point to when you click through the icon itself to actually opt out of the advertising if consumers elect to do that. And there is an associated fee for being listed on that page and having your opt-out work with that page. There are also various guidelines around how you use the icon, who owns it, who has the right to use it, various indemnity and liability provisions as any contract would have them. But just the point being that you sign and remit this document along with the fee, and then you're considered what we call a participant, a program participant. We're not a membership organization. We don't have members per se, but we do have participants in the program, and this is the mechanism for that participation. You self-certify to the principles framework by signing this agreement and then using the icon as instructed. And here are, on the following next two slides, are some examples of where you are likely to see the icon when you travel the web. And an important quick backgrounder here, if you don't happen to see the icon, that doesn't mean that it's not out there and it's not doing its job. Remember that it's on advertisements that are behaviorally targeted, that are interest-based advertising. There are a lot of ads out there that aren't targeted in any way, that are simply served generic or just sort of mass serving, and those are not required to have the icon affixed to them. I mean, currently OBA comprises somewhere between 3 to 4% of the total volume of ads served, so it's still a small segment, but it's growing fast. And one reason is certainly from a seller standpoint, is there's a premium associated with delivering such a highly qualified consumer as a targeted ad might, in terms of connecting the buyer with the advertiser. So it's certainly lucrative, and it's likely to become a bigger part of the media mix over time. But on the left here, you see an example of an AdChoices icon, the DAA icon as we call it, advertising option icon. It always appears, or it should appear, in the top right corner of any ad unit that is an OBA ad from a company that's part of our program today. This example here is from Procter & Gamble as the advertiser. It's served through an ad network called Evadon, which is one of our approved providers. And that icon will appear in the top right corner with the actual triangular motif and then the words AdChoices. And a consumer would click on that icon, and they'd be sent through to the consumer opt-out page that we have at AboutAds.info, and I'll get to that in a moment. If you're a web publisher, a media company, and you're not really running ads, but you are capturing third-party data on consumers when they arrive to your website, you'll be obligated to embed the icon somewhere near the privacy notice or at the footer of your web page, preferably your start page or any other web page where you are collecting consumer info. That's consistent with FTC requirements generally on online privacy protection. So that's an example here of Ziff Davis, the technology website, where they've embedded it near the bottom of that web page. Here's some other examples. We have Dawn, dishwasher detergent on the left here. There's the icon. We have a credit card offer from American Express, the AdChoices icon prominently in that top right corner. A telecom offer from Verizon. There again, the AdChoices icon in the top corner. So consistency of display and that sort of brand awareness that builds over time is critical to the program. There's a lot of specificity around that when you work with us at the DAA to make sure that you're implementing that properly, but that's so consumers know where to expect that, that indication that OBA is occurring and that they have the control that they can exercise. And here's just a detailed view of that Ziff Davis example I just mentioned moments ago. This is what we call publisher notice. So these are, it's either in-ad notice, it's in the advertisement itself, or it's publisher notice, it's on the web page, and in some examples it can be both. So at aboutads.info, there is what we call a consumer choice web page, and you can visit this as a consumer directly if you like. But most folks, roughly 90% of the consumers that have exercised their choice in the program, come to this page through the DAA icon. So they've clicked on the triangular icon in an ad or on a web page, and they've been sent directly to this web page. And what this web page does is it reads that consumer's browser and determines through the number of web cookies that have been placed by an advertising network or an advertiser that participates in the DAA program. So you'll get a unique list of all of the DAA participant companies specific to you as a consumer based on your browsing activity, and it will populate that window. And you then have the ability to either selectively or collectively opt out of those advertisements by indicating your choice on this page. You can see in this particular view there are individual checkboxes adjacent to each of the ad networks or advertising providers in our program. You can select the one that corresponds to the ad that you just came from, or you can simply select all at the very top of the view there, and that will opt you out of all of the participating companies present in your browser when you visit that web page, and you will be opted out as a consumer from any future OBA ads offered by those companies in the program. So that's at a very basic functional level how the program works, how the icon displays, what it clicks through to, what consumers see, and how they exercise that choice, which is really the key components that the DAA was designed to address from the beginning. Consumer education on what OBA is, give them the relevant controls in their hands and allow them to exercise that choice and then respect that choice over time. So you've signed the agreement, you've implemented the icon, everything's working functionally. We now enter the phase of the program that I particularly admire, which is the enforcement side of the program. And so few programs in the past have included this component, which is crucial. And this demonstrates to regulators, legislators, policymakers, advocates, academics, anyone who's watching our industry that we are very serious about the folks that participate in our program and that we have an effective program. And we've engaged two organizations, two reputable organizations, the Council of Better Business Bureaus and the Direct Marketing Association, to enforce our program. And they do this through a couple of ways. They will take inquiries directly from consumers through the website at aboutads.info, or they'll actually be monitoring the market space based primarily on who is participating in our program, but really looking at anyone and everyone who is engaging in OBA in any facet. Because while I'm proud to say we have many hundreds of companies that are signed in our program today, there are still many more companies that are either not yet aware of the DAA or this framework or simply haven't considered it. And we have yet to connect with them, but it's an ongoing effort. So CBBB and DMA ensure that you are in compliance as a participant. They have the ability, and you agree to, you essentially agree to be monitored over time for the purposes of demonstrating your ongoing compliance to our principles. So this can entail everything as relatively minor as how you are positioning the icon and making sure it's functional, to very serious things like, is your notice up to date and is it current and accurate? Is your privacy notice consistent? Does it describe what you're doing with OBA? Are those opt-outs functioning properly, and do they preserve the choice of the consumer over an appreciable level of time? Remember the Chitika case where they expired too soon. These sorts of considerations. So a typical accountability program review process, again, I want to note that as particular as they are about who's doing this out there, and they're very careful and thorough, and they have a number of tools at their disposal, these accountability programs, they also, I want to note, work very proactively with the companies. So if in the unlikely event there is an example where someone is out of compliance, they've either not implemented the icon properly, the opt-out is not functional, the notice is not current, they'll contact the company first. They don't sort of raise and shame right out of the gate. They'll contact you directly, independently of the DA, it's worth noting. And they'll work to bring that company back into compliance, because that's a success story, to be able to say that they work proactively, they're in compliance, and they acknowledge what was wrong, but they were able to correct it in a very expedient and productive way. If, however, they're not responding to the satisfaction of the accountability programs, they do have the ability to escalate cases as needed to the FTC, to state attorneys general, to any other sort of consumer protection authority in order to get quick and appropriate resolution to that issue. So just a quick background on the individual organizations and what they've done so far. The CBBB has received about 100 different consumer complaints. Again, at the DAA, I didn't see these come across my desk because we are independent from the accountability program itself. These came directly to the CBBB, and I think that independence is important. They've sent over 250 individual compliance letters. That means they've contacted companies in writing for various reasons. It could be either just to introduce themselves as the compliance entity or to actually address a wrong. And in November of just last year, they actually did bring 6 individual enforcement cases. They were all concerning advertising networks, and they did tend to center around the theme of broken opt-outs. So that's an important issue. I mean, it's an important consideration in the program. It's something that the FTC has looked at. So that was an appropriate action taken. But all of those companies, I'm proud to say, are back in compliance now, and the issues have been addressed. The DMA also receives direct inquiries from consumers. They've received fewer, roughly 2 dozen so far, but they also survey their vast membership of marketers to make sure that those members are in compliance with the DAA program, and that's a considerable amount of companies. And those companies are responsible not just to comply with the DMA's own code of conduct, but of course the DAA principles as well. So where is the DAA today as an organization? We have 400 companies actively participating in one capacity or another in one of the uses of the icon I've described to you, or listed on our opt-out page. There are 130 what we call third parties. Those are primarily advertising networks, so the companies actually delivering the ads, actually capturing the data and serving the targeted ads, and that they're at the epicenter of the process. They are all listed on our consumer opt-out page that consumers can use. That includes the top 15 ad networks by size and by volume, so that's Google, Yahoo, ValueClick, AOL, Microsoft. Everyone who's anyone in the space is part of this program in terms of an ad network. And I'm happy to say that we've also managed to bring a lot of major global brands to the program, companies like Kraft and American Express and Procter & Gamble and others, who recognize that even if OBA is just a part of what they're doing in their advertising planning, they need to make sure that they're doing it right from a consumer privacy protection standpoint. They innately understand the value of long-term consumer relationships and how privacy and trust are a huge component of that lasting relationship. All it takes is one privacy violation or one violation of that trust, and you may have lost that customer forever. So they've been going about this in a very strong way, to the extent that we've actually seen very strong engagement from categories like all the leading automotive advertisers, Ford and Toyota and Hyundai and General Motors, consumer packaged goods companies like Procter & Gamble I mentioned, financial services companies, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Amex, the leading IT brands like Dell and Hewlett-Packard, and then telecommunications companies like Verizon, Sprint, and AT&T. They're all in the program also. So very strong participation. If you'd like to see sort of a laundry list of who exactly among these many hundreds, their logos are displayed at Ads.info under the Participating Companies tab. Now, just to segue for a moment away from pure advertising and marketing and commerce online, and just talk a little bit more broadly about a very recent effort of the DAA, which is an indication of how we are broadening the scope of our program, and there's actually a couple of other examples I'll mention also. Late last year in November, we published a set of guidelines on the use of multi-site data generally. So not just for marketing or advertising purposes, but any kind of use of multi-site consumer data. What the concern this was addressing was an acute concern on the part of the FTC in particular, that any kind of web-based consumer data might be used in an adverse way against that consumer's interest. So even if advertisers or marketers were simply doing what they do best, which is delivering valuable and beneficial messaging and products and services to consumers, just the possibility that the data that they're using to do that might be used to do, for example, determine credit eligibility, or determine a financial standing, or unearth a certain health or diagnostic condition. That was considered very sensitive data. And this document really, all we've really done through this document is said publicly, we're not doing what we're already not doing. So we happen to know at the DAA that none of the companies who are participants in our program are using data in that way. But we felt it was necessary and appropriate to say it very publicly, to commit to the public that we would not use the data in those ways, to use it to make any kind of adverse determination or decision on a consumer on the basis of that data. So it establishes limitations on what we call multi-site data. That's all of that third-party viewing data that we gather in the OBA process. It vastly restricts the use of multi-site data for eligibility purposes. So as I said, to make any kind of eligibility-based decision. There's special provisions, just as they are under the OBA framework, for sensitive data, and these same requirements around accountability and transparency and security carry forth. To be clear, this framework on multi-site data does not replace the OBA framework, the original DAA principles announced in July of 2009. It simply layers onto that. The entire program is augmented by these. So if you're a current participant in the DAA program and you are, you're a health marketer, for example, you're making a commitment that you're not using that health-oriented data for purposes other than what you originally disclosed you'd be using it for, which is for advertising only. So it simply codifies that commitment in this document. Again, employment eligibility, credit, health care, insurance, these are the areas where the regulators are looking very keenly for any kind of abuse, and the DAA came together and said, we don't have any abuses going on here, and we're willing to go in writing with that declaration. Now, the third and final piece of this program, a critical piece that we hadn't delivered until very recently, is the Your AdChoices campaign. And this was an effort by the DAA and all of our stakeholder organizations to once and for all reach out and speak directly to consumers. Now, understandably, from the beginning, we had been focused on putting together a very sensible but a very vigorous set of principles, enforceable principles, a consumer-facing trust mark in the DAA icon, a whole operational framework for delivering that icon, and having a website where consumers could exercise control. The only piece that remained after we got all this great industry engagement and all this great policy work under the belt was to start to talk to consumers in a very accessible, understandable way about what this icon is when you see it on the web. How do you use it? What does it do for you? What sorts of additional information might you need to be successful in terms of exercising your choice? And so in January of this year, we launched YourAdChoices.com, which is a consumer-facing website. About Ads.info is more industry-focused and reads at a more policy level. YourAdChoices.com is for consumers to read. And on this website are all great tools and resources, from instructional videos to other types of written documents and information that explains very step-by-step, and in some of the ways I've just described to you, how the icon works and what they should be looking out for when they see it on the web. The whole campaign was done by MLM McCann, which is a 4A's member, a terrific agency based in Salt Lake City. They did it pro bono, so it was all volunteer work. And they themed the campaign, Will the Right Ads Find You? Because in many ways, consumers are going to become aware of the DAA icon simply because they've just received an interest-based ad, an ad that was delivered to them based on their interests as inferred from their web viewing behavior. So if they just want to pause for a moment and understand what that is, how it occurred, and how they may be able to insert their voice into that process, this is a website that helps that. So it went online in January. It offers all sorts of great program explanations, instructional videos, and other resources. And it's accompanied by a web banner campaign, which is starting to roll out right now as we speak. So these are not OBA ads. These are not targeted ads. They're just running general inventory out on the web right now through a variety of DAA participant companies who have graciously donated online advertising inventory for this purpose. And if you are an ad network or you have online ad inventory you'd like to donate towards this effort, please don't hesitate to contact Clark, and he can facilitate that referral to the DAA, and we'll get you involved in the program. But there's a whole variety of different ads built around this concept of, will the right ads find you, and if they don't find you, how can you opt out of that process? They're all free. The DAA offers them through arrangement directly to the inventory providers, and the idea is for all those ads to start building a presence and some level of brand awareness around the DAA icon, the Your Ad Choices program generally, and all of these ads click back to youradchoices.com, the website, for more information. So let me just close by giving you a roadmap of where the DAA is and where we're headed next. We started, as I began this day, talking about the implementation of the program, how in July of 2009 we first released our principles framework, how we then operationalized the program through the use of a graphical icon, a consumer-facing trust mark, which is the Your Ad Choices icon, the DAA icon, how we brought a consumer choice page live to the web at aboutads.info, where all consumers could go to opt out from this process if they so chose. We brought the DMA and the CBBB in as dependable, vigorous enforcers of program compliance. I came on board last April as the first managing director for the DAA to help operationalize it internally and get all the important processes in place so that we could grow as an organization. We announced our first 100 program participants last June. As you just saw, we have more than 400 in the program now. We launched our consumer education campaign. That's the youradchoices.com website and all the web banners that are running right now. Many providers, Microsoft, Google, Discovery Communications, 24/7 Real Media are just some of the great companies in the online arena who are running advertisements now in support of the program. Where we're going to go next are in two different directions, and you might have been anticipating questions in these areas. One is to start to broaden this program beyond the U.S. A lot of what we've talked about so far has been in direct response to FTC and legislative and policy scrutiny on this issue with regard to U.S. consumers. But there's a recognition that this is quite portable, and what we've developed in the trust mark of the icon can be taken to other jurisdictions around the world where privacy is equally important, whether it's the obvious, like Canada, just to our north, or overseas to Europe. And discussions are now underway to essentially license the DAA icon to similar organizations as the DAA, similar consortiums of trade groups for the purposes of ensuring OBA consumer choice in those areas. And then also a recognition that we're not just beholden to any one technology. What the program's done so far is very successfully deployed across the desktop web, if you will, the web as we know it, as we access it from home or on our laptops. But as you know, more and more consumers every day are migrating to portable devices, mobile phones, smartphones, other types of portable devices they bring with them. And there's a recognition that the icon needs to work in those environments too, not just on a mobile web application, but in an app that's built into the phone itself. These little software applications that are basically self-sufficient ecosystems of their own, that are doing their own data capture or doing their own talking and communicating with the handset you're using, whether it's your geolocation or what you're doing with the handset itself. So right now, the DAA is working to migrate the principles framework that we built ostensibly for the web into the mobile devices to address privacy concerns at the app level, the device level, and other mobile-specific privacy concerns. So international expansion and migration of the framework to the mobile space are two initiatives you'll hear more about later this year and the years to come. And that brings our program to a close. And I know, Clark, we probably have a bunch of questions from folks that have for our program here. If any of you don't have questions now or you'd rather address them another time, here is also some information on how to do that. I encourage you to visit the industry website for companies that want to get involved at aboutads.info, or if you want to point interested consumers to what this is in a language that they can understand best, that's youradchoices.com. And there, of course, is the number for the Washington office of the DAA if there's further questions you might have. So back to you, Clark.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Yes, you're right. We do have some questions, and Let me start with the first one, which reads, the opt-out mechanism forces the consumer to select perhaps hundreds of ad networks. What's the FTC's position on this element, as the onus is on the consumer to take multiple actions to opt out, and is this too great a burden to avoid FTC regulatory enforcement?
It's a good question, certainly a reasonable question, but to clarify, there actually aren't hundreds of ad networks on the opt-out page because there's only currently about, I mean, it's not hundreds, not multiples. There's probably about 85 or 90 listed on the page or in the program today who are active ad networks, including the top 15, as I mentioned. And that's, you know, those 15 alone, those 15 ad networks comprise about 85% of the entire ad-serving market. They're that big. But as I noted earlier, that's not necessarily what the consumer will get. The consumer will get, once they visited the page, the consumer opt-out page at about Ads.info, that page will start to populate whatever cookies they have received from ad networks participating in the program that are specific to them. So I'll just use myself as an example. I went to the Consumer Choice tool recently after clicking through a DAA icon ad, or the actual icon appearing in the ad, and I was listed only about 10 networks that I had to select from because that's all that existed in my browser. So I'd only been served ads from 10 of the participating companies in the program. Now, it's conceivable that someone could get all 90, but we certainly have heard anything that's negative in that respect. I think the FTC, so far at least, has deferred to the sense of thoroughness that they like to see. They certainly want to make sure that all the significant players are here, and that, you know, that consumers have appropriate choice. That choice, of course, shouldn't be overwhelming. But we're of the opinion that it's not. We've scaled this down into what we consider to be a fairly manageable menu of choices that they can exercise. And certainly with the consumer feedback that we've received, we haven't heard anything that was particularly negative about that point. I think the preference has been to make sure that it's complete, and it is.
And it's sort of a related issue. What kind of the response has there been from consumers? Are you seeing a lot of traffic there? Are most looking at it and opting out, or?
They are. We have. I actually don't have some of the metrics in front of me, but we have something on the order of 100,000 visitors to the Your AdChoices website every week, or sorry, to about Ads.info.com. There have been well over 1 million visits since the program went online, and there's a fairly low percentage of folks who have actually opted out, but that's not always an indicator of program success, because remember, the program, at least as the way it's been designed, is not necessarily to get anyone and everyone to opt out of the program. The most important thing is that they're presented a choice, and it's an informed choice that they can make. If they elect to opt out, that should be absolutely unimpeded, and it is. It's unimpeded and respected. If they exercise that choice to opt out, you know, that's respected across the program. But we really put that choice and that control in the hands of the consumer and let them make that determination. So we've always looked at it as a success measure as the sheer number of icons that we have out on the web, and we're always building more towards that just to get more of it out there so it's more prevalent, more accessible, and to make sure that the information in the process is as easy and as simple for consumers to use as possible. If we've given them the information and the education and the choice, we've succeeded, and we respect their decision after that.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Another question, should brands that allow companies identified as third-party to place pixels on the brand's website for the purpose of behavior targeting place notice and choice on their brand website?
Well, I think if they're going to take, and a pixel would be a different mechanism, like a web beacon, as opposed to a cookie. But I think if there's ever going to be such a use or a partner, you know, any such partnership with a third party, with a website, a branded website, that they ought to think about, you know, first any type of arrangement they need to make and reflect that in their own privacy policies, both the policy of the brand website as well as the vendor or the provider of that service. And I would strongly encourage them to participate in the DAA program if they haven't already and follow all appropriate guidelines for that. As long as that pixel is placed and it's capturing multi-site data, not just contextual information, so not just information about consumers on that page, but only restricted to that page, but looking at where they've also been prior to arriving or in the past, you know, that falls within the scope of this program. So they need to sign with the DAA and then use the icon appropriately.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question, I guess, a concern, I guess, about small businesses that are out there that would like to participate in the program, but whose revenue is not high yet, and that $5,000 becomes an impediment? Are there avenues for them?
There are actually. That's a great question. There is an ability for those companies either through Quantcast, which is one of our partners in the program, and they specialize in a lot of really terrific services for small to medium web publishers, what we call long-tail companies, online merchants, small companies online, or directly to the DAA. And as long as your annual OBA revenues are less than $5 million per year, we will waive, I'm sorry, less than $2 million per year, we will waive that $5,500 certification fee entirely. You'll still need to sign the agreement. You'll need to bind to every principle just as any company, big or small, does today, but you won't have to concern yourself with the fee, which I can certainly appreciate can be a significant investment for many. So as long, again, as what you're earning from OBA-based advertising does not exceed that $2 million annual threshold, you would qualify for that fee waiver.
Okay. And finally, at this point, you talked about the enforcement mechanisms through the DMA and the Council of Better Business Bureaus. Now, are there, in addition to their working to bring people into compliance, are there actual penalties for non-compliance?
Well, the penalty of non-compliance is, I guess, one of it is, of course, just the shame factor, the fact that, you know, the CBBB has the right under the program to go public with any case that they feel is not being adequately addressed. And as I've noted, they do have the additional avenue of escalating that case through other channels, regulatory, legal, and legislative, as they see fit. So that's really at their discretion. I think if you want an indication of how the CBB looks at it, and it's not that they speak with a voice that's inconsistent with the DAA, they don't, but one of the reasons we work with them is because they have such a great integrity in the field of self-regulatory enforcement through their work through CARU and children's advertising dating back to the 1970s. So they have a very strong and demonstrated track record of enforcement of self-regulation. And I think you can look at that case history for relevant indicators of how they look at issues, how they handle them, where they escalate them to, and what the associated penalties are. And I would just add that, you know, all of those avenues remain at their disposal, as they always have historically with regard to this program. So I would expect, I mean, I don't have any examples I can point to now. There's been no fines assessed. There's been no cases referred as I speak to you today. But it always remains a possibility, and, you know, and should it happen, I tend to think that that's a very strong indication to the marketplace and certainly to the regulatory community that we're very serious about the guidelines that we publish.
Okay, great. Well, Peter, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to come on and talk about this very important issue. I would remind our participants that if they have any further questions, that they can contact me and we can get answers. I would encourage you to visit about Ads.info as well as the YourAdChoices.com webpage and take a look at the program and participate in the program. And Peter, as I said, thank you very much, and this will end our webinar for today.
Thank you, Clark, and thanks, everyone.